Hello, everyone. This is Keith Carlson. I work at ONC in the Certification and Testing Division. And today, or in this video, I'm going to be giving a walkthrough of using the Inferno testing tool and specifically, I will be running the ONC G10 standardized API test kit against our, Inferno provided reference server, just to give a kind of walkthrough of how to use the Inferno UI and how to, what it looks like to run all of the tests against a compliant server and, see everything pass and just all the steps that are required to kind of execute those tests and get the nice green check marks that everyone wants to see. So, um, there's kind of a lot of context that can go into, the backing behind the Inferno G10 standardized API test kit. I'm just going to give some quick context here to start out, um, just so we're not jumping straight into it. But, on our healthit.gov, page, on our landing page, just on the front page, I kind of like to show the navigation of how to get to these just so you can better understand how things are organized. We have a topics page and we have a specific page for certification of health IT, right? Because the G10 standardized API test kit specifically tests one of ONC's certification criteria within the certification program. And so you can just want to point out that we have this landing page here. And navigating through this landing page, we have a specific link to our 2015 edition Cures Update criteria. So, the 2015 edition Cures Update is our latest edition of criteria. ONC in our rulemaking, finalize these certification criteria that electronic health records are required, EHR technology is required to meet in order to, get certified under the ONC certification program. And so we have these boxes here and we have links to these tables for our different test methods. And I specifically clicked on the 2015 edition Cures Update test method because the G10 standardized API for patient and population services is a 2015 edition Cures Update criterion. And, on this page here, we list all of our certification criteria. These are the new ones in the 2015 edition Cures Update. This is what was updated. These are the new ones added in the Cures Update. These are the revised criteria in the Cures Update. And then we also have our, if you want to see the other 2015 edition criteria, you can click on this button here and go see the ones that are still existing that haven't been new or revised in the Cures Update. But certainly a lot to take in here, but for Inferno G10 testing, we want to specifically focus in on this row of this table here, because this gives our information on some helpful information on the G10, again, standardized API for patient and population services certification criterion. And, we specifically have a link to our, what we call CCGs, which stands for Certification Companion Guide. And I'm going to go ahead and jump into here. This is just a great kind of landing page for our, for this certification criterion. We have this for all of our criteria. You can see links to those on that previous table. But, we have a lot of just information here on what this is, different resource documents. You can look and see the actual regulatory text that was finalized that kind of defined the specific technical outcomes and conditions that must be met in order to be certified to this criterion. And, we also include kind of technical explanations and clarifications to our, G10 certification criteria to this criterion. And I also want to call out specifically the test procedure tab up here, because this contains kind of the very specific steps for what a system under test must demonstrate and what a test lab, when you're actually going through official ONC certification with an authorized testing laboratory, we also have a column here for what the test lab verifies based off of what the system under test is demonstrating. And so, this is very technical. There are many steps contained through here, and basically this is what Inferno implements, is this test procedure, and it automates as much of this as possible. Exercises your system under test to test these requirements in an automated way, and make assertions, and report results to show if you're properly meeting these requirements or not. And Inferno does this in as much with as much automation as is possible. You'll see when I go through the actual run through that there are some places where we can't do things in an automated way, and we have a whole section for just yes or no attestations. But there is, a lot of automation that goes into like testing this and automatically exercising your server. So, yeah, that there is just a kind of a lot of information going on here. This is kind of a whirlwind of context I want to give. I guess I'll also just mention this standards reference drop down here, where you can see a link to all the different standards that are, the fire-based standards. At least most all of these are fire-based. USCDI, I guess, is an ONC standard, but these are mostly fire-based standards that are adopted in the G10 certification criterion and that make up the entire standardized API, right? This API is made up of authentication and authorization requirements defined in the Smart App Launch framework, and then there's data response requirements, like single patient data response requirements defined in US Core, and then there's a multi-patient API requirements, defined in the bulk data access. So a lot of implementation guides, and Inferno is testing these guides along with the G10 test procedure to make sure everything's being properly implemented, and that these guides you've implemented, your server has implemented these implementation guides correctly in a way that they're forming one coherent standardized API solution. And I will call out here at the bottom too, there's even more standards linked, because very recently we have announced updated the CCG to include the standards version advancement process for 2022, or for this year, the SFAT versions that were approved. These are essentially newer versions of the regulatory standards. So you'll see, like, for example, USCDI version 2, which was released in July 2021. At the time we were writing the rule, the regulation for this certification criterion, it was before USCDI version 2 existed. That is why we just have USCDI. There isn't a version here, but this is USCDI version 1. But obviously USCDI has been updated in the time since. And so we have, through the standards version advancement process, given developers the flexibility to choose to certify to one of these updated standards. And so, there's a couple US Core versions, right? We've adopted US Core 4 and 5, whereas in the base regulatory, at the time of writing regulation, the newest version of US Core was 3.1.1. But now we give flexibility for developers certified to 4 or 5, and you'll see the other versions of new standards here. But again, Inferno gives you'll see when I go into the user interface, Inferno gives you a nice kind of form where you can select which standards you would like to test to. And so, we make this hopefully easy for folks to work with in the Inferno user interface, and can understand, can easily just test based off of what standards you would like to implement that are approved. So with that, let me just go ahead and drop down this testing thing, and this is where you can see a link to the ONC Certification G10 Standardized API Test Kit built using the Inferno framework. There's a link to that right here. I'm also going to navigate to it just a little bit of a different way, just to show that we have an inferno.healthit.gov landing page. You can go straight to this, and you will be presented with this page, which, there's a lot of useful information here of, kind of two different sections, I guess. There's like one section is a subset of the other. So kind of the overarching, backing, or the overarching definition of what Inferno is, there's information on that in this Inferno development framework, and this is very high level. And you can click learn more to go kind of look at some documentation for how, like, fire tests are written in Inferno, and Inferno is completely open source, so you can write your own Fire tests. If you are interested in that, would very much encourage you to kind of look at the GitHub repository and click Learn More. But the ONC supported, and hosted tests and utilities are kind of contained in this box here. And we specifically have a section for, within the ONC Health IT Certification Program. Obviously, just like I was talking a lot about G10, we have a specific test kit within the Inferno development framework for testing requirements to the G10 standardized API for patient and population services in the 2015 edition Cures update. And you can just click this blue button right here to launch a test session, which I'll be doing in a second, but want to be sure to call out too that you can click download to go to instructions for how to download Inferno locally, which I would definitely recommend looking at. We provide this instance as kind of a reference application slash, it's meant to be kind of a demonstration instance, but we would really encourage folks to download Inferno locally. There are steps to do that pretty easily or very easily. If you're okay with using Docker, you can very easily launch a local version of Inferno. And when you do that, you'll basically end up setting up a local host that you can navigate to in your browser that takes you to a page very similar to what we're about to launch into when we click the standardized API test kit. So you'll see the exact UI that I'm about to walk through when you download locally. And, having your local copy, one of the benefits of it is, obviously you're not relying on this website here, which can get a lot of traffic, or, we obviously try and maintain uptime as best as possible, but there are occasionally issues with this application. If you're running it locally, you're running on your own machinery. And it's good for, we know that some folks, when they're developing their software, develop behind obviously like the development versions of their software are behind a firewall. And so you can download Inferno and kind of host it behind your firewall to test your software while you're developing it. If you kind of want to use it for continuous testing and, development. So we just want to make the plug for that. But without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and click on the G10 standardized API test kit, and I'm going to launch well, actually, before I launch a test session, we now are presented with this landing page, which is new in the past few weeks. If you're familiar, if you've used Inferno, the G10 standardized API test kit before, but haven't come back to it recently, you'll notice that this is new. And this is just giving you the option to select what combination of standards you would like to test with. Again, I mentioned that through the standards version advancement process, we have adopted newer versions of certain standards that are allowed to be tested to obtain ONC certification. And so, these are kind of the options that you have here. And, you can just feel free to select however you would like. And basically Inferno will be loaded specifically. You will be given a test session specifically for, a test session that contained tests specifically for the combination of standards you selected on this screen. So I'll go ahead and show how this works here. I'm going to keep right now. Let me just select the base regulatory standards, the ones that were available before we announced the standards version advancement process approved standards. So that's US Core 311, Smart App Launch 1, and Bulk Data 1. I click Select Options, and I am going to be redirected to a custom test session. You can see up here that we have a test session with this unique ID that is unique to our specific test session right now. You can save this URL and come back to it at later times. And nobody else will be given the same exact, ID if they launch a test session on this website. But before I start going in and kind of running these, one thing I want to just call out, just so you understand kind of how this custom test session was set up based off of what I selected on that previous screen. I'll call your attention here to the left side to these kind of different test scenarios that we're going to run through, but look at the numbers. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 7. So there are other test scenarios, 5 and 6 that have been hidden based off of what we selected. Remember, so the specific example here of why 5 and 6 are hidden is because we selected US Core 311, and the single patient API test scenario for US Core 311 is number 4. So remember that. We have number 4 single patient API for US Core 311. As an aside really quick, I'm going to launch just a separate test session just to show. I'm going to go back to inferno.healthit.gov, click on this test kit, and I'm going to click on US Core 5 this time. Let's say I want to test with US Core 5, but leave everything else the same. I'm going to click select options and get redirected again to my custom test session. Now, remember before how we had number 4 for single patient API? Now number 4 is hidden and we have number 6 for the US Core 501 single patient API test kit. And this is going to contain some different tests versus what's contained here for, 311, based off of the US Core 5 requirements. So that's automatically loaded and taken care for you, and just know that based off of what you select on the form, you will be taken to the tests that need to be passed for those combinations of standards, and tests that are irrelevant to you are hidden and not included. So want to call that out, but with that, now that we're here in the Inferno testing user interface, in order to run these tests, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the Inferno reference server, which it's really nice that you can we have a preset here for automatically, kind of using the Inferno reference server. The reference server is just that. It's a reference server that we provide. That's, it's a FHIR server that is loaded with synthetic FHIR patient data and is set up with an authorization framework according to the Smart App Launch Guide, and basically is set up to conform to the G10 standardized API requirements. So what you can do is you can use Inferno to exercise the reference server, and the reference server is then implemented to meet all of the requirements, and so it will pass all the tests, and we can kind of see what that looks like, and use it for reference. So before I select that, though, I'll just call out that, I think the best way to, you can click up here at this top level kind of header here and click run all tests, and you will go through all of you will go through basically this huge form for filling out everything you need to fill out to start running all these tests. But I think it's a little easier to kind of go through these one by one. So I'm going to start out by just going through each scenario one by one. So I can click on a scenario and then just click run tests for that specific scenario. These are just the inputs that are needed to run the standalone patient app full access tests. And so you can see here, let's start with number 1. So we click run tests, and you will see that, we give you instructions for what you need to do to start running these tests, right? So Inferno's testing methodology, or orchestration, is Inferno acts as a client application, right? So G10 specifies server requirements, and so Inferno is going to act as a client. You're going to point it at your server, and Inferno is going to act as a very demanding client, exercising your server and kind of validating the responses that your server provides to make sure that everything is happening correctly, because this is really the high-level use case that ONC wants to support with these G10 requirements, is supporting the use case of external third-party applications, client applications connecting to EHR servers. And in this case, Inferno is kind of acting as that external third-party client application that is wanting to connect to a server certified to G10 requirements. And so you have instructions, right? You have to register Inferno as a standalone application. It gives you the redirect URI, and then you'll need to fill in the endpoint for your FHIR server. Once at registration time, you'll register Inferno with a client ID and a client secret. Inferno's already kind of pre-filled with the scopes that are required to be demonstrated. And you can choose to use other things like Pixie. Basically in certain places there are, these forms are a little bit different throughout these test scenarios, which we'll see, but you'll need to go through and fill these out. But I will say that one of the nice things, actually, let me mention first before I click cancel and go to the reference server, just call out that you can navigate between these JSON and YAML views for the same information. So if you end up filling this out and you want to save, let's say I put for my endpoint test.FHIR, you'll see that that's saved right here, fire endpoint value test.fire, and you can copy this JSON and like paste it back in later to automatically fill in these fields. So that way you don't have to like go through this form kind of manually each time. But I don't have anything filled in right now. So the submit button is not available to us. But I'm gonna go ahead and click cancel and set our Inferno reference server preset. So I click that. We see at the bottom that this has been set as a preset. And this is really nice because this automatically fills in all the information for the Inferno reference server. The Inferno is already registered with the reference server with this client ID and this client secret, and so that's filled in for us. And so once we apply that, we now have our submit button available to us, and we can start running through the scenario, which is going to simulate a standalone patient app launch. And this full access is important because it's going to be expected that the end user using this client application grants full access, and we're going to test that the server properly provides full access when full access is granted. So I think with that, we're ready to just jump into this and see what this looks like. So if we click submit, we're going to be, Inferno kind of sets up this redirect URL that we're going to need to navigate to, or this URL that we're going to need to navigate to authorize, and then we'll be redirected to Inferno once this process is complete. And again, this is a little bit of a manual process. This is, basically following, again, the steps of the Smart App Launch Framework, which I can actually go into really quick, which might be helpful. So let me actually cancel this just so I'll show that we have links, and don't worry about these failures because I canceled it, so they failed, but we'll go into that. But you can click here to go to the standards. The link to the standards is being tested. And so, the Smart App Launch Framework is a profile of the OAuth 2.0 security standard or framework. And it's you can look at this implementation guide to understand what Inferno is testing. I like the diagrams that they provide here. And so we are doing a standalone launch. So we can see that for the standalone launch sequence, we get a nice sequence diagram for what this is looking like. And so this is what the authorization sequence looks like. And again, remember that Inferno is acting as an app in this scenario, and the reference server is the authorization server, or any other server that you point Inferno at is going to be the EHR auth server for this scenario that we're looking at right now. And so we see that basically the first step in requesting authorization is for us to be redirected to the authorization server, where the end user will need to authorize the app, and on approval, we will be redirected back to the app. And then the app can now make requests to get an access token or finish the OAuth flow to get an access token that it can use to retrieve data. So this is the flow that we're going through right now. So let me go back and run the test again and click submit. And so Inferno puts together the link that you need to follow in order to redirect to the authorization server. So that's what this link is here. So I'm going to click that. And on the Inferno reference server, we have a very, very rudimentary and simple patient picker, patient login scenario here, right? In real life, this would almost certainly, you would be redirected to a login where a patient would enter their username and password to log in to the authorization server. But in this case, instead of asking for credentials, we just kind of give two options for two patients you can simulate logging in as. So when I click select, you can kind of just envision that like I've entered in the username and password for this patient, which this is synthetic data, obviously, this is not real data. So for these synthetic patients. So let's go ahead and just select this bottom one here. And again, we're taken to a very rudimentary authorization screen where we have to select the scopes that we, as a patient, after we've logged in, that we want to authorize this app to have access to. And again, it's just very simple here on the reference server. This is this end user authorization step right here in this sequence diagram. But this is the full access scenario, and so it is expected that we are going to grant full access in this scenario. If you deselect any one of these for full access, you will get some failures, but we're going to leave everything selected and click authorize. And now Inferno will be able to exercise the reference server, and all the tests were correctly passed. And so now that we have kind of our first set of tests that we can start to dive into, I'll show how nice it is that you can kind of expand these and you can see the individual tests that Inferno did to, you know, the individual tests that Inferno executed. And you can look for these different icons here. This is the request icon. Let me see if I can find one. Here's an informational icon that shows that you have some messages you can look at. You know, so just look out for those. You know, there's some different icons for different information that is available. But when we see this globe icon, that means there is a request that was made. And we can actually go in and inspect that request. So if we drop this down, there's a specific request tab where we can show the very specific request that Inferno made. We can click on the details and see all of the request headers, the response headers, and the raw JSON that was provided, or the raw payload that was returned. You know, the payload in this case was JSON that was returned by the server under test. So Inferno made a request for this information and it properly received the payload that it was expecting, and you know, it validated it validated in this next step the required fields, and since it contained all the required fields, this test passed. If there was a required field that was missing, you would see this fail. And Inferno, we try in Inferno to provide as much error and debug information as possible. And so, you know, if you fail a test, be sure to go in and look at what information is available, because it might be able to provide you some context on what was missing and what was expected. And that can hopefully help you make a fix to ultimately pass these tests. So that is the standalone patient app full access scenario. Let's just go now to the standalone patient app limited access scenario. So this is very similar to this, except we are only going to grant limited access once we get to that authorization screen. So let's see what that looks like. But you know, we're testing the same standards, the same flow. When we click run test, we're going to be shown a overall similar screen. All of the fields that were presented on the previous screen are included here, but they're locked in this scenario because we're using the same, you know, Inferno is going to launch as the same client that was registered in that previous step. So it's you know, we're automatically kind of including those inputs from the last you know, the last run through over to here. And then the things you can change in this launch are you want to specifically specify what resources we're going to grant access to. And you can change this based off of what FHIR resources you would like to grant resource to. I just like to leave the default here that the Inferno, you know, just has by default. It includes these three. I'm going to go ahead and copy these. You want to, when you run these tests, you want to remember what you put here. So I'm copying these and I'm just going to paste that up here just so we have that as reference if I need to go back to it. But I'm going to click submit, go through our usual OAuth dance. I'm going to pretend to log in as this person. But now this is where we want to only authorize limited access. So basically, remember we said we only want to authorize access to patient, condition, and observation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to deselect everything except for, right now I'll just go ahead and deselect everything. But then I want to only allow patient, condition, and observation resources. So that is patient, that is condition, and that is observation. So only those are selected, and these are left selected because these are other additional non-FHIR resource scopes that are defined. You know, you can learn more about what these scopes mean in the Smart App Launch framework, but these are meant to be left selected because these don't have to do with the Inferno's only testing for kind of limiting access to the clinical data, which is contained in these FHIR resources. So we want only condition, observation, and patient. Let me just double check. Condition, observation, and patient. Yep. So I'm going to go ahead and click authorize. And, you know, Inferno is going to go through its process again, and you know, all the tests were passed. And it's just to drive home what this scenario did. If we basically expand these tests here, we can see that like the individual tests that were run. So Inferno requested access to patient resources, and access was expected to be granted. And so remember, I selected we allowed access to patient resources. So Inferno made a request to get a patient resource, and it properly got some data back. Again, all synthetic data, but it for the reference server, but it properly got data back. And so it's like this test passed because that was expected. But look at some of these other tests. We see that Inferno tried to access allergy intolerance resources. But if you remember, we didn't select allergy intolerance. We specifically deselected allergy intolerance. And so this was restricted properly, right? If we look at the request here, there was a 401 response. Inferno tried to get allergy intolerance resources, but we got an error back. An error was returned. And, the error message from the reference server in this case said it was restricted due to invalid scopes. And that's what we expected. So this test passed because we expected that to be restricted. And so that's what's being tested in this kind of limited access scenario here. So with those two kind of authorization and authentication scenarios done, let's move to another authentication authorization scenario that again is defined in the Smart App Launch Guide. I'm going to just jump back here to show that for the EHR Practitioner App launch scenario, there really is just one more intermediate step if there is a EHR launch sequence. And again, the flow diagram is showed here. In this sequence, we're kind of like, it's assumed that there's some kind of EHR session or there's an EHR session that an app is being launched from. And so there's this intermediate step where you have to be redirected to the app from the EHR session. But then once you are redirected to the app, you go through a flow very similar to the, or you go through this exact flow of app EHR authorization server sequence that's defined down here. I think they, call that out in the guide that once you go through this EHR launch, you kind of you'll see how this is organized here. Once you go through these steps, you kind of continue with these other ones down below. You can look more again in this implementation guide, obviously, to understand these requirements. We don't have time right now to go through everything. This would take a whole day, but it really is interesting stuff once you start to get used to it. And Inferno's testing all this in an automated way. But basically, we're going to simulate launching an app from an EHR and make sure that that app is able to launch correctly. So we click run tests. And, again, you're given all the information you need to register. Everything's pre-filled for us with the reference server preset, but you can follow this to kind of understand what you need to do for your own system. I'm going to go and click submit. And so in this case, we kind of have to simulate an intermediate step of like launching Inferno from an EHR. And so if we go to the endpoint for the reference server, this is the Fire endpoint for the Inferno demo Fire server. If you scroll to the bottom, we have a app launch link here. And this is again, imagine this is a very rudimentary EHR right now. You're a clinician using an EHR and you want to launch an app. Well, this is our very rudimentary EHR. And, we want to launch an app. We obviously need to include a URI in this case. And so this is the URI Inferno provides this. It's saying it's expecting a launch request at this URI. So we're going to paste this URI and launch this app. And now we are redirected back to Inferno to kind of go through our usual OAuth flow. You'll see here that this like same tab that I was on redirected me to continue testing. It also updated here on this tab because again, these unique IDs are kind of persisted between these two tabs. So the updates were made in both places, but I'm just going to go ahead and close this tab. These both are exactly the same, but I'm just going to close this just to go back to this, just so that's not confusing. And now we go through our usual OAuth dance. And, in this scenario, we're expected to grant full access. And once we do that, the test pass. And again, on your own, feel free to go kind of look through these tests. Now that we've finished, all these tests are kind of related to authentication and authorization. Now we're going to go through tests to actually start retrieving a ton of clinical data in the form of Fire resources and kind of testing all the required search parameters and, validating all the Fire resources that are returned. So again, we have links here to the required, like this links out right here to the US Core implementation guide. And, you're required to demonstrate support for all of these, requirements here, all the SHA requirements here is what Inferno tests. And so let me go ahead and first run the tests. These ones take a little while because there are just tons and tons. I don't know if it's in the thousands. I definitely think it's in the hundreds of requests that are going to be made, because, I mean, look at almost all of these are requests, all of these subtests, because you have to test the searches by making a request to the server. And so there's all these resources, all of these search parameters, or all these searches that need to be supported. And so these take a little while to be run. Again, these are the required fields that you need to fill out. And once you do that, you can click submit. And Inferno will start exercising your server and making all of these requests and validating what's returned. So let's go ahead and, for example, look at allergy intolerance. So you'll see that, you know, these are tests that were made, the allergy intolerance tests that were completed. If we go back to the US Core Implementation Guide, we can see that the summary of the requirements here for the allergy intolerance, it is required that the clinical status search needs to be supported. So let's see what that looks like in Inferno. So this is returns valid search for allergy intolerance by patient, and read interaction, patient rev include. Yeah, because I'm trying to look for, this is the fun of the live demo and trying to figuring this out live. This view is a little bit weird for me. I'm not seeing what this, you know, I don't know, this clinical status doesn't provide much information, so I'm having a little bit of trouble mapping this requirement to the to Inferno right here. But, you know, again, having experience looking at US Core, I would recommend we go in. You can also click on this link to go into the actual allergy intolerance profile in US Core, and we can kind of get some more information on what's required. And at the bottom of each of these profiles, we have a specific section that explains more what the mandatory search parameters are. And we can see here that, for example, we have a shall requirement that the patient search parameter needs to be supported. And it's nice here because this gives an example of what that like request looks like that needs to be supported. So your server needs to be able to support allergy intolerant searches that reference a specific patient. So now if we go back to Inferno, that is what this is testing right here. So this is server returns valid results for allergy intolerant search by patient. If we look at the requests that were made, you can see that it searches for an allergy intolerance. You know, this is the base URL, right? We can map this to this right here. So we have base. This is base right here. Then we're searching for allergy intolerances / allergy intolerance right here. And then we're specifically searching based off a specific patient. And in the example, they give this ID, but on Inferno, we have a synthetic patient data with ID 85. Inferno made this request. The server properly responded with a, you know, a very light bundle, but this is still a FHIR compliant response, US Core compliant response, and so we pass this test. And that is true for so many of these other, you know, you have different search parameters that must be supported for so many of these different resources, you know, and you can kind of look through the implementation guide to see that. And so, yeah, so those are the Inferno single patient API tests. And now we're going to jump to the multi-patient API, which again, you can find more information by reading here. You can go link out to the bulk data access guide if you want to see the actual implementation guides as being tested in this scenario. I don't think there's much worth, like, again, I just don't have time to explain the whole bulk data implementation guide in this call. And so the goal of this is to just give a demo of Inferno. And I don't think there's much more to talk about. At this point, it's pretty similar flow. We click run tests. You have to fill this out according to your implementation. There are a couple of additional inputs that are required, but, you know, again, we provide as much information that hopefully is helpful for folks. And if you don't have questions, you can always submit questions to ONC or ask on chat.phir.org. You know, what specific, you know, if you have questions on kind of how to fill these out, but those are provided there. We click submit, and Inferno, you know, for the bulk data tests, you don't have to, there isn't user interaction to actually do and go through an authorization screen. And so, you know, these just kind of happen in an automated way without having to go through a similar OAuth dance that we saw before. So wow, yeah, we've gone through these first 4 scenarios here. Now we just have these additional tests remaining. And this is kind of a, you know, additional tests is properly named in a broad way because there's a lot of broad stuff contained in this. There isn't one kind of set of things. This is just kind of everything else that is remaining that we couldn't test in these automated scenarios. Or that, that just didn't make sense that weren't tested in these scenarios before. So for example, when we did our standalone patient app and limited patient app launches, we were doing those as a confidential client. And if you're familiar with OAuth 2, being a confidential client means that you can protect a client secret and that your app is registered and provided a client secret. But G10 also requires support for public clients. And so when you run these tests, you also need to demonstrate that you can support app launches where no client secret is provided, where your app is just registered as a public client, meaning that it does not have a client secret. And so we have another additional test here to go through another launch to demonstrate support for public clients. And if we go through this dance, the Inferno reference server properly supports this public client. So we will be able to go through this. I don't know why it's being slow right now, but a little bit of a slowdown on the reference server. Oh, this is fun. I want to wait. Thanks for bearing with me here. Fun. If this hung up here, I'm gonna just pull a new tab and go. Let me just go back to my Inferno test session. What I did in another window here was just pull up my browser history and like grab this link again to our Inferno test session so I can go back to it. Yeah, these tests failed. I'm going to go ahead. Basically, I just navigated back to this URL. We can see that these tests failed because it didn't complete. Let me try running it again here. Okay. Who knows what hung up there, but now we're going through our OAuth dance again. And once we go through all that again, we pass the test. And again, you can always read the background and test methodology. I know I'm going through this fast. It already has been 45 minutes, so it's like I am kind of going through it fast, but there also is so much to see here that I just encourage you to be sure to read this metadata or this documentation data to hopefully get some more information on what is being tested here. And yeah, cool. So yeah, you can just look at this information on kind of what is being tested here. Because I know I'm kind of going through this quickly. So next we have a scenario for token revocation. G10 has requirements for token revocation. We can see that in the regulation text. If I jump back to this G10 CCG here and we look at the regulation text, we can see that we have a paragraph here for patient authorization revocation. Saying that a Health IT module's authorization server must be able to revoke an authorized application's access at a patient's direction. So that is what this is testing here. There is not a standard that we've adopted for token revocation. None of the adopted standards in G10 define how to do token revocation in a standardized way. It's just purely right now a functional requirement. And so that is why it's kind of pulled out into here. And when we run this test, Inferno just really all it can do, since this isn't standardized, is ask you to attest that you demonstrate revoking tokens provided during the patient standalone launch. And it's nice that Inferno, kind of copies through the bearer tokens that were used in a previous launch and says, hey, I need to see that you revoke these tokens. So based on the app launches that we've done previously, we've used this bearer token. And in order to revoke this on the reference server, again, we want to go to inferno.healthit.gov, go to the landing page, /reference server, the landing page for the demo Fire server, and we provide a just simple revoke token interface here where you can paste the token and click revoke, and that token will be revoked. Again, different servers will implement this in different ways, and that's okay as long as they can demonstrate it. And so in this scenario, we click yes because we just revoked the token. So yes, we did that. And you may need to revoke the refresh token. I know in the case of the reference server that when you revoke the access token, refresh tokens are revoked too. So I don't need to paste this in also. So I'm going to click submit. And again, these tests ran, right? These negative tests where Inferno tried to request patient information, but it used a invalid token that we just revoked, and we got an error, which is expected. We also have tests for invalid odd parameter. You can read more about the odd parameter and what's being tested here by going through this documentation. But this is just another launch that we require where we have to, kind of perform this invalid launch. Inferno sets it up nicely so that all we have to do is click here to like perform an invalid launch. In this URL up here, there is some bad information purposely included. A bad odd parameter is purposely included, and we see that our fire server properly gave us an error. And so when we go back to this screen, we can attest that that launch failed. There's no way for Inferno to know that like this failure properly happened. So you just have to attest that that launch properly failed, which we saw that it did. And Inferno is now able to pass all these tests and does not receive a redirect URI because that's what's expected when there's an invalid odd parameter provided. There's an invalid token request where basically Inferno is going to use in the background an invalid token, and we're just going to make sure you authorize access in this OAuth dance, and then basically Inferno is going to try and request data with an invalid access token and properly doesn't receive any data back, and so the tests pass. Similar EHR launch with patient scopes, just another EHR launch, a specific EHR launch scenario that we need to test. You can see background and test methodology here. There's not too much more to show for the Inferno UI here. It's all pretty similar to what we've seen. Since this is an EHR launch, we have to go simulate that EHR launch sequence again. So let me go back to the reference server, just going back to this landing page for the Inferno reference server. App launch. Paste this, launch app, and you can now follow this link to authorize, go through the normal OAuth dance as we've seen before. And our test pass in this scenario. And then finally, we have all of the remaining tests that can only be tested through visual inspection. There's no way for Inferno to test this in an automated kind of an automated way where it can make some kind of request and make sure it got a proper response. These are things that are higher level than that, and based on the G10 requirements, can only be tested through visual inspection and attestation. But it's just the nice thing here is that this is all organized for you, so that all you have to do is click run tests, and you can just fill out this form one by one. You can make sure that you demonstrate support for application registration, and you can click yes and then take notes if you would like. So there's all these different questions you can go through, or these different attestations you can make, and I'm just going to click yes for all of these just to show what it looks like when we pass. We click submit, and Inferno is just if you click no for anything, that you'll get a failure, but since we click yes for everything, we pass these, and whoo, victory. Look at that. We have all fully testing. It's a beautiful site, all these green check marks. This test session, which I will include a link to this session in the description of this video, has fully completed tests. And we can look at this Inferno report. If we click report here at the end, we get this kind of full-on report of everything that was tested. You can print this report. And yeah, see all of that. So this pretty much concludes where we're at this point. I hope this was helpful for folks just seeing how to run through all of this. Please just play around with Inferno and use the reference server as you please to kind of test running these tests. Be sure to look at these other links down here. This is all open source, and you can download Inferno. You can report issues to us. A plug that I do want to make is I'm going to go to healthit.gov and click on our events, upcoming ONC events. We have these kind of 2 current sessions, and again, depending on the time you're watching this video, right? Like right now it's September 9th, 2022 that I'm recording this. This may be out of date if you're watching this way later, so you could just exit out of this video now if it's way past these dates. But we have these 2 kind of events that we're hosting right now and on a consistent basis. We have these Let's Build sessions where we, you know, you can come join the Inferno team and kind of learn how to build your own tests in Inferno. If you like are developing a fire server and want to learn how to write your own tests for your specific fire use case, please come to these and join us and ask questions, and we'll have the technical team that builds Inferno available to answer questions and go through a demo. But more related to this video, I think, is this specific office hour that we're currently doing, and we have these upcoming office hours still happening. And, you know, be sure to look at this page because these dates might change. So by the time you're viewing this, you know, these dates might be a little bit different, but you can register for office hours where, you know, every 2 weeks, we're just kind of available for an hour where you can bring your questions and ask us about Inferno, ask us about our API regulations, you know, so that includes G10, and, you know, hopefully get some help on, you know, if you're stuck on anything. Try to run through the G10 standardized API test kit in Inferno. But yeah, I think with that, I think we're all done. Thank you for, you know, bearing with me through this. I hope this was helpful to folks. Please, you know, we always want to hear if you're having any issues, you know, come to these office hours if you can. If you can't make the office hours, if you, you know, I'll include this link in the description below. But I think if you go to healthit.gov/feedback, you can, yeah, you'll be redirected to our feedback and inquiry portal. And if you ask a question here about Inferno, this will get redirected to me and my colleagues, my coworkers who work on Inferno. So it'll get redirected to us eventually, and we'll be able to help. You can also go to chat.fire.org to the specific Inferno stream. I'll include a link to that in the description, and you can, you know, specifically interact with the Inferno team because we monitor that Inferno Zulip thread consistently. So, thank you, and I hope this was helpful to folks, and then that, you know, have, you know, happy testing with Inferno. So thank you.